I'm broke, but I'm happy. I'm poor, but I'm kind. I'm short, but I'm healthy. Yeah. I'm high, but I'm grounded. I'm sane, but I'm overwhelmed. I'm lost, but I'm hopeful, baby. And what it all comes down to is that everything's gonna be fine, fine, fine.
All right, here we go. Boom, coming in hot, Chichi, on a Tuesday. How we doing, brother?
Doing great. Do you know what Mike Myers, Justin Bieber, Michael Bublé, Alanis Morissette, Keanu Reeves, Jim Carrey, Celine Dion, Neil Young, and Drake have in common? None of them have ever been on our show, but they're also famous Canadians, and we have our second biggest market right now is going to be very excited. We're very big in like Paraguay, I think, but we're also very big in Toronto and the entire Canadian area. There you go. So that's why I'm excited today. What do you got, Case?
Oh man, well I'm excited. Yeah, you're right. We got a big fish out of Toronto. We put the line in and we pulled him in, man. But I want to go back a little bit, Chinch, because this guy is one of my dear friends, one of my best friends in the game, and in life. And it's funny when you go back to when I was a kid. This is when we were both kids back when we first met. Mark has been in the game. Mark Shapiro has been in the game since 1992 as the Indians' assistant baseball operations. I don't know what is. I don't even know if that was a title back then. We'll have to talk to him about that. He was the farm director from 94 to 98. That's when I met him because I got drafted by the Indians in 95, became the assistant GM and then the GM for the Indians and then eventually the president. And now currently, I think this guy, he's like the CEO, he's the president, he's a hot dog vendor, the marketing head. This guy basically wears 45 hats for the Toronto Blue Jays, running that organization since 2016. So let's bring him in, man. My good friend and Toronto's own Mark Shapiro. What's up, brother?
That's the first time I've been introduced to Toronto's own.
There you go.
I like it.
I did say, Mark, when I would go on some Toronto stations for MLB Network, and they would ask me about you. They didn't even know that we really knew each other.
Right.
But I did say before you and Ross came on, I said, listen, your organization, you're getting one of the smartest guys in baseball. Your organization, the Toronto Blue Jays, will be good for a long, long time. And I will live and die by that statement. So.
And I got the check in the mail to you very shortly after that.
Yeah.
The endorsement fee. The endorsement fee. Sean's available. It's available for pet foods.
Whatever you need, I'm available, brother. I'm available. Dude, Mark, I want to stay really quick. Just, a lot of this stuff, like current Blue Jay stuff. You guys are in a great spot right now. Your team, obviously over 90 wins last year. You played really well. You made the run in the postseason and just came up a little bit short. But for you right now, how do you feel about just some of your offseason moves, where you're at going into 2023? What do you feel about the state of the Blue Jays right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's always interesting, especially when you're, as you in my intro noted how old I am and how many off seasons I've been through and how many times I've seen, you can get swept up because there's no games to report on, right? Or talk about. So if you're a fan of the game or you work in the game, you can get swept up with trying to win the off season. And we started the off season with probably the best returning group of core players. If you look at it objectively by our R&D department's objective metrics, we had the best returning core of players based upon WAR, which is a pretty good place to start the offseason. That means we didn't need to remake our entire team. We needed to think about, the players we lost, which was really just Ross Stripling, and how we can tweak and get better, which for us was, filling Ross's whole, getting a little more swing and miss in the bullpen and trying to think about balancing out our lineup. But balancing out our lineup doesn't necessarily make, one of the best offenses in the game better. So you need to be careful. You're not just emotionally reacting to kind of some things you saw, the fact that we were almost all right-handed last year. So we really, to date, our offseason's been primarily focused on run prevention. We were excited to have Kevin Kiermaier making catches for us instead against us, and he'll allow us to, to at times shift George Springer to right field, which we think would give us one of the best defensive outfields in the game with those guys, him in center and George in right, and Lourdes or whoever else, is in left. And we added Swanson to our bullpen, who was one of the best relievers in the game last year. Obviously had to give up a very good player and a great person in Teoscar Hernandez to do that, but also got a prospect back. And Teoscar was in the last year of arbitration, and we'll have Swanson for 3 years. So, and now we still got, it doesn't feel like it, but we still have a lot of offseason left. And I think we're focused on, how to improve our offense or balance our offense out a little bit.
Yeah, well, you're right. Why, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I mean, you have so many good young players, and I want to kind of go into those guys a little bit. Coming down to being a coach at spring training a few years ago, I had a chance to talk to the minor leaguers at the time. And a lot of those guys were Vlad Jr. and Bo Bichette, and a lot of the guys that are now in your core group. Can you talk about those two guys, a little bit? Because I know Vlad obviously made the adjustment going from third and winning, and now going over to first and winning a Gold Glove. We've seen probably would have won an MVP if Shohei Ohtani didn't exist. He's probably going to stop a lot of guys from winning MVPs. And the maturation of Bo too. Last September, really, it was incredible how he went to another level and really won some games on his own. It seemed like with his bat. Just talk about those two guys and what you've seen from them in these first few years in the big leagues.
I mean, they're exciting guys because they came up to our farm system together. They won, and the value of winning in the minor leagues. There is a value to that, the expectation to win, the understanding of how important that can be. They built a relationship and a friendship and a level of professional alignment, and they transitioned to the major leagues very, very short, period apart. It is incredibly challenging, and this from just when you got traded to Cincinnati to come in as a young player with expectations, and those guys were 3 years younger than you when that happened. They were high school players or an international sign who were transitioned to the big leagues before they were 20 years old, and that's incredible to think about the expectations of a country, kind of when Vladdy gets to the big leagues and is the most renowned prospect in the game. Right. It's just not that easy. Transitions don't go that smoothly. And for young players, progress is not linear. It's not this smooth line up. It's a jagged line, and you hope it gradually moves up. So I think what both those guys have gone through is demonstrating incredible talent, incredible impact, joy at competing, and love of the game, a desire to win, a desire to create an environment that they take ownership of, both of them in their own way. Different attributes with Vladdy. He reminds me a lot of Kirby Puckett, and that type of leadership. It's like there's a joy that he exudes in playing the game, that lifts everyone around him, from the people in the stands to the guys in the dugout next to him. So he brings that joy to the game, and he can feel that in the most tense of moments, right, which is pretty special. He can step outside of the box and laugh or smile. And again, I think he's still scraping the surface at what he can be. There's still learning going on. There's still a process of kind of settling into what he will be as an impact major leaguer. With Bo, there is a fire that burns within him, an intensity, an expectation for greatness that he has for himself that's probably higher than what anybody else has ever had for him. And there's always a little bit of a grudge with him that he wasn't a first round draft pick. Right. He was only a round after, but in his mind, there's nobody better, and he plays with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder that he has never really been looked at in the way he views himself. An elite athlete, an explosive athlete. Again, still maturing, still learning. I think defensively is the part of his game. Last year, you saw really struggled the first half of the year, and probably one of the best hitters in the game the second half, and finished at about what we would expect. But watching him the last 2.5 months of the season, he was a force. I mean, you couldn't get the guy out. It was remarkable to watch. So both guys that I think we forget how young they are, because they've already got 3 years in. and in Vladdy's case, almost 4. But both guys' best baseball is still ahead of them, and that's probably what excites me most about our team.
Yeah, and also too, I mean, those guys, they're when you watch the Blue Jays, the excitement that those guys could bring. I mean, I think that's what you talked about, how Bo for the last 2.5 months went to another level. Vlad's one of the best players to watch. The exuberant, the passion that he plays with in the game, and the leader that you have now. Charlie Montoya at the beginning, in the middle of last year, was probably a tough move that you and Ross had to make, but you ended up bringing on John Schneider as the interim manager, and he did a great job. Really, his record towards the end of the stretch, and then getting you guys into the postseason. And now you've hired him, obviously to a few-year deal here. Can you just talk about John Schneider and what you love about him, and also just the whole staff? Because I've gotten to know those guys a lot from Bud and Pete Walker. Just what you love about the staff you guys have there in Toronto.
Yeah, man, I was, you always do a lot of reflecting at the end of the year, and I was reflecting a little bit in the last couple of days, and our major league coaching staff and support staff, are really, one of the things I was thinking about, how passionate, hardworking they are, how much they care, how much they want to win, how much they care about each other and the organization. Just a quick, note on Schneid's, and I always try to think about what makes him different. And I'm not sure how many guys, I know there have been other guys like this, but the coolest thing for me, besides the fact that he's incredibly smart, hardworking, and talented manager, is that this is a guy that was drafted by the Blue Jays, played as a minor leaguer in the Blue Jays system. When that ended, immediately shifted over to managing and coaching in the Blue Jays system, worked his way up, became a coach in the major leagues for the Blue Jays, and now is manager of the Blue Jays.
Wow,
that doesn't happen very often in this game, because guys get released, they go to other organizations, they jump from organization to organization as they, move up the ladder in the minor leagues or get an opportunity in the big leagues. But the depth of relationships that he has throughout our organization, from equipment guys to trainers, to people that live in Dunedin, to people here, to our players that he's coached, including Vladdy and Bo, and managed in the minor leagues, is incredibly deep. And I really think the foundation for success in that job is relationships, right? Like, one of the quotes we were talking about my wall, one of the quotes on my wall says, "No significant learning can occur without a significant relationship." That's from my brother gave me that, from a famous educator. That's a teacher that said that. The reality is coaching's the same thing. You got to connect before you can coach, right? You got to connect. And you and I have spent a lot of time talking about that, that you got to build a relationship, and Schneid's has strong relationships with the guys he's coached with the players he's coached, with the support staff around, who are so important in us being the best we can be. But I think besides him being really smart, really hardworking and thoughtful, and a good at his job, and he's going to keep getting better, I think a difference maker for him are the strength of relationships that he's got throughout the entire Blue Jay organization.
Yeah, it's funny you said that, because when I was down there a few years ago coaching, we're in the coach's room at the end of the day or just at the beginning, I was always like, man, who's that guy? Like, there's an energy about Schneider, an energy that people are attracted to. And you're right. He felt like he knew everybody, and it just had a lot of respect.
You don't know what that's like at all.
Yeah, no, I don't know. That's why I connected with him so well. I was like, "What's up, Schneid?" And then I was last year when I went to the game in New York when Charlie Montoya got thrown out and Schneider became the manager, Budzinski was the bench coach. I was heckling them. You got me some good seats. I was heckling them. I was 2 rows back going, I go, "Schneid's Bud," and they turned around and I'm like, "Are you taking over this game?" They're like, yeah. I was like, "You guys are in trouble." So we were going back and forth. I'm like, Budzinski and Schneider taking over, but it's great to see that Schneid now has that role, and you could tell the respect that those players have for him, and the fact that they love him. And when you continue with relationships, I want to stay there, Mark. Is that the relationship with Toronto itself as a city, but also as the relationship really with Canada? You can feel it when you guys are in the postseason and when you guys are making the run, down the stretch. There's something different about the Toronto Blue Jays. There's a different energy that comes, really from, it feels like a whole country is behind you guys. Have you felt that And also too, what's your relationship been like, knowing that, you know, that it's a little bigger audience than just a city?
Yeah. Well, I always like to think about like what differentiates situations. And when I thought about leaving Cleveland after having been there 24 years, not an easy thing to think about.
Yeah.
You know, in my mind, I was never going to leave Cleveland unless there was a compelling situation, right? Unless something was compelling. And
Right.
the job here offered a lot of the things that, you know, were compelling for me just from a sheer nuts and bolts of doing a job. But you know, one clear differentiator is that we're the only team that plays not just for a city, we play for a whole country. And that sounds good, you know, like, oh yeah, what does that mean? Well, what it means is when we go play the Seattle Mariners, you know, that is thousands of miles away from Toronto, that stadium fills up with Blue Jay fans that drive down from British Columbia, drive down from BC, which is amazing. These are fans that are in you know, different time zone, 3 hours away, 3 hours difference from here, thousands of kilometers from Toronto, and you know, they're locked in, you know, to everything going on, you know, with the Toronto Blue Jays watching us play. And we have over 1 million people a night watching our games when we're at our best, which is, you know, that blows everybody away in Major League Baseball. It's hard to conceive, right?
Right.
Same thing when we play the Indians, when we play the Tigers, when we play the Twins. You know, there are people coming down, crossing the border to watch us play. So the pride, I think, that guys start to feel, not only that they're in a world-class city, Toronto is a world-class city, incredible place, but the pride that guys start to feel when they start to understand, like, holy cow, these fans are everywhere, and they're not coming from Toronto to see us play. They're coming from this, you know, incredible geographical expanse of Canada. It starts to resonate with guys, you know, the more that they're here and they understand it over time.
Yeah. Last thing on Toronto, because, and then I'm going to go back to our days, you know, early on and what got you into the game. But I just wanted to, you know, you're such a guy, man, that lives by his morals, lives by his virtues, and lives by your routines and your habits. And you know, seriously, you're probably the number one guy in the world. Hey, who has the best habit and routine in the world? I'm like, bing, 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 Mark Shapiro. This guy's an absolute killer, right? Can you talk about a little bit about that, about what your philosophy is for that organization, what the philosophy is for guys, that the clubbies, to the players, to the coaching staff? You know, what do you expect out of them, and what are the philosophies that the Toronto Blue Jays live by? And I know brought to you, but from what your philosophy is for life.
Well, I mean, those are obviously there's a lot of overlap in those two things. You know, I'll kind of first talk about some personal things, you know, which are very simple, right? People talk about what's your why. I wake up every day thinking about how to make this the best place to work and the best place to play, you know. And I think if you start there, that, you know, the best place to play, what does that mean? Our players have to know that we care, you know, and that exists for every single person here that touches a player, that deals with the player, that works to support the players. Every single person here is thinking about, what can we do? That can be in facilities, that can be in the food they eat, that can be in the people that are preparing them to play, helping them recover, training them to, you know, be the best they can be mentally, physically, and fundamentally. You know, it's an obsessive focus on controlling everything we can control. And that's kind of what I try to think about. Like, there are going to be a lot of things we can't control. Some of those are like what other people in our division do, you know, this offseason, right? We can't control that. Have no control over, you know, what Cash does or what the Rays do or how good the Orioles are getting, but we can control what we do. So, you know, working to make this the best place to work for the people that work here, that help to identify our players, scouts, develop our players, player development staff, performance staff, medical staff, acquire players, all the front office staff, Ross and all his group that, you know, work in the front office side, and then ultimately build a major league team, and everybody else on the business side as well. Like, I'm thinking how to make it the best place to work and the best place to play. As far as organizational philosophies, you know, quick story that kind of leads into that for you. When we first got here, like everybody else does, we kind of sat down, okay, we're going to go away. We went to a hotel in South Florida. You know, it was a mixture of people that were new here, like Ross and myself, a few others like Mike Murov, and then people who had been here, like Joe Sheehan and John Gibbons was in that room, and some others. And we sat down, always important to me to kind of talk about what our vision, what our values are. Ultimately, there has to be something that differentiates you as an organization, that makes people want to come work there and want to stay working there. And we came up with a really fancy, long mission statement. I mean, it was good, and I have no freaking idea what that was, by the way. I can't remember a word of it. I remember calling Ross on a drive on the way home, and I was like, "What do you think, man? How do you feel? Like, are we in a good spot?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's good, it's fine, but man, I wish it could just be get better every day." And I'm driving along, and I'm like, it can. That's awesome. That's universal. That, is absolutely applies to every single person in the organization, whether they're an analyst, an intern, working in sales, working in community relations, no matter a coach, a player, the president of the team, doesn't matter. Like, if we all wake up thinking about how to get better every day in order to bring world championships to Canada, like, that's our mission. It means that we're committing to finding some way to improving, to developing, to growing, to learning. It's a very simple way of saying that we're a learning culture. And if you think about 500 people, whether they're in the Dominican Republic, whether they're in the Pacific Northwest, whether they're in Texas, whether they're rehabbing a player in Dunedin, Florida, in the 100-degree temperature and 100% humidity, not touching, not feeling like what they're doing is that important to the Blue Jays winning now, but absolutely crucial to the Blue Jays winning 5 years from now. If every single person's thinking about not only being the best at what they do, but getting better, improving, developing, growing, learning, that's scalable competitive advantage. So when I think about the Blue Jay organization, I think about it being humble and open-minded and focused on getting better and learning.
Oh, I love that, man.
And we don't have, you've seen this, you can attest to this. Yeah. We don't have slogans and quotes from John Wooden and, Newt Rockney, and we don't have 80,000 quotes. We just have get better every day, or Mejor Harse cada dia. We just have get better every day. We do have be a better teammate every day, get stronger every day, the different areas, but we mostly are just focused on get better every day. And I think it's so universal, so simple, that Ross, in that moment, he hit on everything we were trying to be.
I love that. And I love how you said, hey, we can make the adjustment. We can. Yeah. Why don't we just change it, simplify it, and get better every day? Dude, obviously being around you and being around the organization, I know you guys live by that every day. And, you talk about getting better every day. Let's go back, man, to your journey to where you're at now in Toronto, because you've been in the game for 30 plus years. And
you've made it clear how old I am a couple times.
Well, I'm just as old, so we're in it together. We're in it together. But what's crazy is that the greatest thing about you, brother, is that you've done everything. You've literally played every role, and that's why I think it's really cool to see where you're at now. Can you take us back to when you got into baseball, 91, 92 with Cleveland? Because you played football at Princeton. It wasn't really, you played football at Princeton. Side note, Chinch, Jason Garrett was the quarterback back then when Mark was the center there at Princeton. Yeah, it's always a little side note. But can you take us back? Why did you get into baseball? What was it that made you want to get into professional baseball?
Yeah, so much good stuff to unpack there that probably nobody will be interested in but you. But
no, people are interested, believe me.
But first of all, and this definitely is a bond that you've got to, I would say, why am I in the game? My dad. Yeah. My dad's love of the game of baseball. The bond that I had with him growing up. The guy was the son of an immigrant, played college baseball at a small Division III school. But my childhood memories are stickball, wiffle ball, catch at the beach, catch in the street, catch with a duct taped, baseball that was chewed up from hitting grounders in bad concrete, going to Oriole games, leaving school every year for opening day, and my whole family going to Oriole games and going to, dozens of Oriole games, and to watch Brooks Robinson play, and then Eddie Murray play, and Cal Ripken play. And just, that was my bond with my dad. Part of it, not all of it, was around the game of baseball and his love for the game. and cool to pass that to the next generation, right? You and I
Yeah.
have done that with our sons. And
Yeah.
you've been able to share a bond around with that too. But so I would say even though I was a pear-shaped wide body, the only talent I had athletically was being a wide body. So I played football in college. You know, my passion for sports was baseball, and I played baseball far more than I played. But it didn't matter how hard I worked at baseball. I was still going to be a pear-shaped 280 pound guy. Yeah. So I got recruited. Football was where I got recruited. And football does kind of, you know, my defining attribute is I'm not that talented. Same thing in the front office, and I'm not that skilled. And but football rewards toughness and resilience and determination and perseverance. And so, when I reflect back on a career, those are the things that have separated me. It's not been talent or intelligence or any of those things. It's been determination. And so. Right. Football was a good alignment with that. You can overcome some lack of athleticism with some toughness, and that was good for me. And then and then getting in where you want to transition to getting into the game.
Getting into the game. Like, and you were saying we were joking around before. I was saying, hey, were you assistant to baseball ops? And you were saying, I didn't really have a title at the beginning. Scott Pioli and I were just hanging out in Cleveland going, hey, what are you doing today?
That is true. So this is good stuff too. Like I went out, my first job in life, I was working for a big developer in Southern California. No idea what I wanted to do with my life, but I quickly learned that was not it. And so I went to visit my dad, who was visiting his players in spring training, and met a bunch of front office executives: Jim Beattie, Joe McIlvaine, John Hart, and Dan O'Dowd with the Indians.
Wow.
I talked to all of them, and of course, like any 22-year-old would do, I was like, yeah, I want to do that. Of course.
Of course you do.
But in 1991, there was no Theo Epstein. There was no example of like guys outside of, there was like, you were ex-players, and there was like the Bavazis, the Quinns, the McPhails. There were a couple of families that kind of dominated the game, and there weren't a lot of examples of guys who didn't play baseball, were academically inclined and were in front offices. That just didn't exist. I know it sounds so common today, but it was not common in 1991. So I wrote, because by the way, there was no email. I wrote 26 cover letters and sent my resume out, and I heard crickets. I didn't get any. I think I got like 4 back. And now I know those were like, they were courtesy. They were straight like, yeah, we know your dad. We'll spend some time on the phone with you.
Right.
Joe McIlvaine was incredibly generous with his time. I went down and like met with him. And then, it was probably like 6 to 8 months, maybe a year later, that I heard from Dan O'Dowd with the Cleveland Indians, who were the worst team in all. Literally, the only thing the Indians were known for was the movie Major League. That was it. Playing in that old stadium, Municipal Stadium.
Nobody's there, right? Municipal Stadium was like 1,000 people.
My dad came in my first year working there. We were playing the Royals on like a night in mid-May. It was like 37 degrees. The Cavaliers were in the playoffs. We had like, in an 80,000 seat stadium, there was like, 3,000 people there. And I remember they were showing like the beer vendor in the bleachers drinking his own beer. And my dad like looked at me and goes, are you sure you want to do this? I was like, hell yeah, I'm sure this is it. Yeah, but anyway, so I finally heard from Dan O'Dowd, and he's like, yeah, we got an entry-level job. And at that point, I had already switched to another job in New York City, which I was having more fun, but still wasn't my career. I was like, I'm there. So I flew into Cleveland, the old stadium. At that point, they were like demoing the last building for Jacobs Field, the new stadium they were going to build. Went up these tiny little staircase into like, a back office in the bowels of the stadium. And there's John Hart, who, is so charismatic, he is waxing poetic about a plan and a vision. These young players, Jim Thome and Sandy Alomar and, Charles Nagy and, Albert Bell. And
Manny Ramirez.
Manny Ramirez. It's a little early for him. He had just played his rookie year. But, that was like, we're going to build around these guys and, Kenny Lofton, and this is going to be it. Carlos Baerga. I think about all the great names. And and we're going to move into the new stadium. And right when we move into the new stadium, we're going to sign free agents, and then we're going to win, So, yeah, I'm like 23, so I'm like jumping out of my seat. But I'm also looking around going, this guy's sitting here with a space heater by his desk, plastic plants, ceiling tiles are missing. I'm like, if anyone, this is not people's vision of what a major league general manager's office looks like, It's a long way from like the portrayal in Moneyball.
It's like the real life major league movie. You're like, no, there really are tiles missing, and the plane pulls up in major league. You're like, here's your plane, boys. It
was a real life, man. That place, that stadium was like unbelievable, right? Like we had to, in the off season, we had to leave the locker room, pack it up, and go work in our weight room was in the basement of a hospital because the Browns were there, So it was incredible. So, when I landed back in New York, there was a message on the old school answering machine, the ones with like, I played it back, rewinded it and played it back. And it was John Hart, and he was offering me a job. And I loaded up, David, my brother, and I loaded up a U-Haul truck 3 days after Christmas in 1991 and drove from New York City to Cleveland. And that was it, man. Like I never looked back. And I mean, I don't think from the first day I started working there, and this is a lot to do with John Hart and Dan O'Dowd and their belief in me and their empowerment of me. I don't think I had a moment of doubt. It was like, this is it. Like I found it. This is the job I want to do. This is the place I want to be. These are the people I want to work with. And I don't think I knew at that moment it would be my life's work. It would be my 31st season right now.
Right.
But I knew I loved it. I knew I loved the players, and then people like Johnny Goro will go on to find, a career for me, and Buddy Black, and a lot of whom I saw, when you and I were visiting at winter meetings a couple weeks ago. But for me to be able to spend time with Buddy Black and Charles Nagy and that's what makes those meetings great. You can see the people that define a career for you.
Can I ask a quick one, Case? Just knowing John Hart, I was so lucky enough to also work with John Hart and Dan O'Dowd in my time at the network, and for me personally, like they are two of the most impressive human beings I've ever met, and I would just try to sit there and listen to them, especially in meeting environments, and when they would talk about like business. Like I think those are two guys I've learned some of the most things that I've taken into this industry in my life from. Like, what did you learn from those guys? And can you explain to people, because they have very, very different personalities.
Very different.
Right?
Yeah. Very different. They complemented each other incredibly well.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's easy for me to talk about. I think, John, when I reflect back, the number one, there's a lot of things, he is incredibly competitive, as you probably know. He's unbelievably charismatic, and does a great job of making people feel good around him, which is a powerful leadership trait. But the thing that like resonated with me, the two things were, John always surrounded himself with young people. And I think he was either consciously or subconsciously, keeping relevant, staying relevant. Like, listen, you gotta evolve in this game. If I was still doing the job the way we did it in Cleveland in the early 90s, I would have, we had stat books on our lap, paper, scouting reports, but everything changes and you got to continue to adapt. So John, never was closed-minded. He was always open-minded, and he kept young people around him and then listened to what they had to say. And the second thing was just the incredible power of what being empowered can feel, right? I think back, and it's more amazing to me now than it was when I was going through it. But I was a 24-year-old guy that, because we got successful very quickly, I got a lot of responsibility, way too much responsibility very quickly. And I was overseeing the farm system in like my third, fourth year in the game, and in doing that, I had to manage and lead men and women, but mostly men, obviously, that were in uniform, that were twice my age and have been in the game on the field for 30, 40 years. And none of whom wanted to listen to a guy from Princeton who never played, and I had to earn their respect, obviously, and listen. But I also had the power of John's belief in me, which was overwhelming. Like when I had ideas about player development, John. I want to, create an individual development plan system for every single one of our players. John, I want to commit resources to the mental side of the game. John, I want to commit resources to the physical side of the game and strength and conditioning. I know it sounds silly, right? Nutrition, but we weren't doing anything as an industry in the early 90s on any of those areas.
Yeah.
And John was like, you're a guy. I got your back. Let's go. Do it. Not, yeah, son, we'll do that. And, when why don't you work 10 years and come back to me with those? He was like, no, you're a guy. I got you. I believe in you. His belief in me, I've tried to pay that forward my whole career,
Wow.
and find other talented young people, far more talented than me. And ultimately, listen, I have, whether it's Chris Antonetti, who has far surpassed anything I did as an executive, and I've learned more from him than he ever learned from me. I've tried to the people that have worked with me and for me, I've tried to pay that forward to them. So
That's great.
John was empowerment, belief, the impact and power that had. Dan, as disciplined, as focused on the details and the small things, and as competitive as any human being and as hardworking as any human being I've ever been around. So incredibly smart too, like really smart and thoughtful, passionate about the game of baseball. Like those things are given. But Dan, there was, there's some funny moments for me with it too, but he modeled it. I remember the stuff you're talking about with me, Case, it sounds little, but I remember my first spring training in Tucson, Arizona. Dan's like, hey, I'll be by at 4:30 a.m. to pick you up tomorrow to work out. And I was like, huh? Yeah. He goes, yeah, or I think he told me, you come by and pick me up, because his wife needed the car. I was like, okay, is this like one day? No, this will be every day.
Oh my God.
Every day. And I mean, to this day, I was like, okay, that became my routine. Like I'm an early riser. I work out every day. It was not about the working out. It was about the discipline, right? Like he's as disciplined and discipline, we you and I both like, listening to Jocko sometimes,
Yeah.
Jocko Willink, discipline equals freedom. Well, there's a lot of truth to that, and it gets back to that controlling the controllable thing. There's a lot of things I can't control within my day, but the way I eat, the people I associate with, the friends I keep, the way I use my time, all those things are things I can control. And so Dan modeled, quite a bit of that for me.
Yeah. You talk about the things you can control, and obviously Dan, working with Dan and John at the network. It's funny when I'm on air with Dan, I look at his notes. I'm like, man, I am so inferior right now. This guy's got notes. He knows anyone that's coming out of the Oakland's bullpen and all that. I'm like, he's just, you're right.
He's got that black
prepared,
book. He's got like this little black book. It's unbelievable. And his handwriting is too perfect. It's intimidating.
He was doing that in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And, as a young guy coming up, that was what I saw, it's like, okay, I am not going to be outworked. And right. I had a very simple thing, like in my own mind, it was like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to do things better and faster than my bosses expect. Pretty simple, but
right.
And that basically is, I'm going to exceed their expectations and the standards of the work I do, and I'm going to do it with a sense of urgency. And what that does is, because I know on the other end, leading people, that created their confidence in me. And that's why they kept giving me more to do. That's why I kept getting more responsibility. Because oh, this guy's doing good work and he has a sense of urgency. Well, wow. that creates a lot of confidence when you're a leader. So when young people talk to me about advice, it's not like do this and do that. It's like, hey, have high standards and expectations for yourself, exceed the expectations of the people you work for, and do it with a sense of urgency. That's, have those simple things, and it's like, you'll keep getting more opportunity.
Yeah, that's how you stay in the game 31 years and you run organizations. Everybody, if anyone's listening, that's how you do it right there. Speed is a force, right? Speed is a force.
And luck.
Yeah, right. Mark, when you go back to I want to go back to where we met. I got drafted in the second round, 1995.
You want to go back to Watertown, New York? Let's go.
Yeah, baby. Who doesn't want to go back to Watertown? You know what I mean? So I remember being in the cages and like you were like behind the cages and they're like, hey, that's Mark Shapiro. He's the minor league director. I'm like, oh man, I'm going to try, I'm going deep here, and I probably rolled over a couple of times, but that when, as a player, when the brass is in town, you're like, oh man, you got to impress. But it started it really, the relationship that you had with all of us as players, I think that was a big thing for all of us. We felt like you had our back. I remember looking back in Watertown, New York, some of the resources that you gave us, even nutritionally for things back then that no one had, even if you got a Gator bar, a protein bar or a protein shake after the game. Like I can remember years later, I went down to AAA for the Reds, years later on like a rehab assignment. I'm like, this is worse than Watertown, New York. You know what I mean? Like that you were so ahead of the game. And Mark, I want to get into this a little bit because, as a matter of fact, recently my sons were like, Jake was like, Dad, I just saw the movie Moneyball and what a good movie and this and that. And no, I want to bring it up for this reason, because your name is mentioned in there a few times. First off, Paul DePodesta, who was the guy that went to Oakland, was under you. I had already known the things that you and the minor league system and John Hart and those guys were doing. I just want to go back to like the analytics of the game. Everyone thinks the analytics of the game is such a new thing. Oh man, we're just getting all these new numbers of WAR and BABIP and OPS plus and this and that. But I feel like you yourself had been doing this stuff a long time ago. When did analytics for Mark Shapiro, as when you were with Cleveland and not yet, the big dog in Cleveland, when did it start to become an important factor in how you evaluated players and you evaluated your organization?
I think, it's interesting. You obviously you learn and adjust. And I think it gets back to kind of a couple of the things that we talked about with John Hart, which is, we started hiring really smart, talented young people, whether it was Ben Sherrington, Paul DePodesta, Josh Burns, Chris Antonetti, Mike Chernoff, Ross Atkins.
Incredible.
And then I think there's like that, again, these are recurrent themes in our conversation today. There's that recurrent theme of getting better and that subject, of analytics, it's probably not the right word, by the way, but let's just use that word. To me, it just
what is the word?
I think, it all fits under the lens of decision making. Like we want to make the best decisions possible, right? How do you make the best decisions? Well, there's two things that go into that. One is information. What information are you using to make decisions? And two would be, what's your framework, for putting that information together, for weighting it and coming up with an answer. Okay. And I think there's components to and I don't know, I've never understood, and Chris and I used to talk about this a lot, Chris Antonetti and I never understood why it was so polarizing, subjective versus objective. So subjective is scouting, objective is, analytics, right? Mm-hmm. In our minds then and now, it's just get the best information possible. That's it, right? And what qualifies as the best information, Sean, has changed, from just scouting and stat books and bios, in the early 90s to advanced analytics and, complex models that are written by incredibly brilliant people that work in our organization. I still think that the subjective side, scouting, makeup, personality, character, medical, all those areas that are probably a little bit more of an art than a science. As much as we try to quantify those things, they're never going to be quantifiable. And that's the beauty, that you can outperform objective expectations when you bring a group of people together who have unique interpersonal attributes and, create a sense of belonging and a culture and an environment, and have an alignment of values and things like that, that there are the opportunity to be better than the analytics say you should be. And I think that's the beauty. The further I go, the beauty is that. Now, it doesn't mean that you can just rely on that and overlook, it means have the best of everything and recognize that there are opportunities to outperform objective expectations, to outperform what the analytics say. And I think that's where, as I've gotten to be older in the game, we have resources that are, incredibly smart and talented that are applied mathematicians or, statisticians, or have committed their life to, or programmers or database managers that have committed their life to managing information and helping us make good decisions and helping us learn from the bad decisions. And I can think back to absolutely crucial moments in my career where I made mistakes, because ultimately everything I've learned is how to take out the bias that,
right.
And the transition in the game was in the early and mid 90s, GMs were decision makers. And now the best GMs are not. Now the best GMs lead decision-making processes, right? They're not making the decisions. They're leading a process. They're leading a group of people to make the best decisions possible. So I think that if you think about it in that simple terms, that used to be decision makers, these guys on Hart sitting in his office with a spittoon in the corner, and a stat book open, scouting reports.
Going like this? Going.
Woody Woodward, yeah. Flipping his ring.
Yeah.
So Woody Woodward in Seattle and trading, for, Felix Fermin and getting Omar Vizquel. And that used to be what it is. But now it's okay. We've got a really complex, organization, and thinking about how do we bring together all the brilliant people working here, make sure that they're best in class in the information they're giving us, then organize that information in a way that allows us to access it quickly, organize it quickly, and make the best decisions that we can learn from when they don't go right. And all that while factoring in the human side also.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to ask you, because I feel like, people say, hey, the old school scout is being pushed out of baseball. First off, is that true? And second off, do you value the eye test? Do you value a guy that goes to watch a kid play and he comes back and he goes, man, I really like this kid's heart. I really like his passion for the game. Is that valued as much as, hey, man, this kid hits the ball 470 feet with a 120 exit velocity? And, because at the end of the day, and I know, come game time, there's a lot more that goes into me facing that guy on the mound than what I can do at a showcase.
Yeah, I think absolutely scouts are still valued. Probably what we're drawn to getting from them has changed somewhat. However, there are still, like, we have Tony LaCava, who is, one of the best scouts probably in the history of the modern game, particularly at hitters, right? He studied hitters' swings and he's thinking about them technically and he understands them. So we're always valuing information and input, but I also think that, the one area that scouts can give us that, especially in the amateur side, that, that we can't get from any statistic, is they can give us a window into that player's life, into their, the challenges, the adversity, and the setbacks that they've had, how they've handled those things, how they've, because ultimately, you and I both know, we go through the minor league system. We get to probably Double A, and the band of talent starts to get very small.
Mm-hmm.
The skills, are all within a very narrow window. Now, every now and then there's an outlier, right? There's a Vladdy, there's a Manny Ramirez, there's someone who just like, okay, that guy's, everyone knows it. Every player, every umpire, every fan, everyone can see it. Those players are different. But the rest of the players are kind of in a small, window of talent, and something is going to differentiate which of those guys get to the big leagues, and then something else is going to differentiate which of those guys stay in the big leagues. And that is often not the quantifiable analytics, because those are the analytics on all those guys is in a very narrow window. That is often something in their head or in their heart, something that, that's more in their personality and their makeup and the way they handle challenges, the way they whether they have a growth or a fixed mindset, to use educational words, and things I know you're thinking about now.
Yeah. Mark, I want to stay there too, because you talked about, early on, mental performance stuff. Like of realizing, I think that's the biggest thing. I always say, hey, listen, you could go hitting the cages all you want. You could have the most beautiful swing you've ever had. You could be over here and be the strongest guy in the room. You could deadlift 600 pounds. But when you get in the box, you're a man with on an island with your thoughts. You know, you're a man on an island. What does failure mean to you? You know what I mean? Like
and a lot
it's
of
such
those thoughts are thoughts you got to get out. A lot of those
no,
thoughts
exactly.
are not
No,
yeah.
exactly. And our thoughts of, hey, maybe the coach said something to you today. You know, maybe a fan said something to you. Maybe you're just not feeling right. And that's why I think like sometimes it's tough to quantify that because we're talking about human beings. But you talked about, was it Charlie Meyer? Charlie Meyer was he was with the Indians when we were there coming up, and I always thought that was great because I used to read the Mental Game of Baseball book growing up with Harvey Dorfman, and I remember, man, and when we had Charlie Meyer with the Cleveland Indians and all the things that were given to us as minor leaguers, every resource that we had, and I thought that was a big deal. You know, for you now with Toronto and the play, even on the player development side, because I know there's still a player development person in you that you're looking at the minor leaguers and you care about how you guys are doing things everywhere in that organization, especially in the minor leagues. You know, what do you think about the mental performance part, and how do you train that with some of your players, especially guys in the minor leagues, to get them to understand, hey, listen, as you move and the talent gets bigger and the talent gets better, especially when you get to AA, you're going to need a separator to make you consistent, that you could show up day in and day out. What do you guys do for that?
Two things. I mean, one, I'll go back to a conversation that you and I had, which is, you know, when you came out of the University of Richmond and led the nation in hitting, you know, and we're talking to you about the mental side of hitting, you were like, come on, man. Like, I don't need Charlie Mott, I don't need a sports psychologist, a guy who's a dean of applied sciences at Rutgers telling me, you know, what I need to be thinking about in the box. And then I remember you telling me 5 years later, everything he said was true. You know, the mind of the moment, you know, not true about the past or the present. So I think there's an understanding that not every 18, 19, 20-year-old is ready to embrace the mental side of the game. I've always felt like where we ultimately want to be, where we aspire to be, is if a player can think about the mental and physical sides of the game with the same routines and preparation and focus and discipline that he's thinking about his swing and his batting practice and, you know, his bullpens and his, you know, pitch development. So ultimately, you know, if they're looking at their day and it's 24 hours of, they can't control the umpires, the field, they can't control where they hit in the lineup, they can't control when they move from level to level. But if they look at their day as a series of, you know, dozens of things they can control, a lot of those things are outside of the sphere of just, you know, technical fundamental baseball skills. And all those things will both, one, keep them on the field, which is, you know, that's a separator. When you look at the, when you look at the plaques in Cooperstown and you look at the guys that make it, you know, you got to be on the field and you got to stay on the field. So hydration, sleep, you know, proper warm up, 3 simple things that, you know, are separators that, you know, you don't think about when you're 19, but those things will differentiate players. And then the mental side is just, it's a separator, man. It's a separator. And you have to personalize and understand which tools help you, whether it's, you know, reading, whether it's talking to a performance coach. Our jobs in the front office are to give our players best in class resources, you know, whether that's food, whether that's coaches, whether that's equipment, whether that's, you know, tools, you know, in the cages, or whether that's people like performance coaches, to help them be the best they can be mentally, physically, and fundamentally. And then we have to personalize and individualize what works for different guys. And so when I think about, and that hasn't changed, you know, what I just said, you know, is very similar to how I felt in 1998 as a farm director. You know, it hasn't changed now. It's just that what has changed are the sophistication of those resources, you know, the incredible capability of those tools. But a lot of what we have to still do is simplify it so players can use it and not just throw these tools out and check a box and say, oh, we're doing all this. We still have to make it so people can use them and customize them and individualize them that fit their own routines and the way they learn, the way they think.
It's almost like the get better every day statement. It's simple, but it's big. It's simple, but it's so big. Instead of having this long statement of like, I'm never going to remember that, but everyone can remember get better every day. Like, how do you simplify things that players will end up using the things that you're bringing them?
So we got to get this entire tool chest, mentally, physically, and fundamentally, the best tools. And man, you spend 5 minutes on Instagram, you can get overwhelmed with 85 guys talking about hitting philosophy. We got to have all the best resources out there. Everything. From the best food to the best. And then we got to say, okay, what works for you, Sean Casey? What works for you? How can we help you be successful? You're going to be different than Mark Budzinski and Ross Atkins. What works for you? How can we help you be the best you can be?
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. So good. I have just a couple more things because I'm thanks for spending the time with us, brother. I have talk about, development and a strength coach and, these guys that matter. We had Cece on a few months back and we were talking about Fernando Montes back in the day. And I remember being in the minor leagues, like, who is this guy? Like my first back.
He was probably the first. I think he was like the first full-time strength coach hired in the game.
Was he really? I mean, he was good. I mean, I remember we I don't know if it was I don't know if there were any analytics for how far you push people because he was like a Marine instructor. He was like, all right, you just gotta have the game. You're doing 20 gassers. I remember Richie Sexton and I.
The Warrior. I remember the Warrior run.
Yeah. What do you remember about the Warrior run?
I mean, Ross and I were just talking about it in winter meetings with Charles Nagy because he used to win it every time.
Did he?
And Ross was saying that he thinks like there's something to it, because mentally it was a gut check. It was more about the mental side, that your toughness, be able to handle a 300-yard shuttle run, in under a certain time. But the punitive side of it was probably not good, that we punished guys when they didn't do it. But the goal of doing something like that and what that meant for the players cheering each other on. There was definitely something positive within that. And I think, we were, listen, I remember when John and Dan, they empowered me. They were like, yeah, you played football. You hired the strength coach. So you put the names together. They didn't have me hire. They didn't have me do the hire, but they had me, put the resumes together and find the group of guys. And there was like 3 or 4 guys. I can remember who they were, with Fernando that we interviewed. And I was part of that process. And sorry, guys.
Sure.
And I'm sorry about that. That was like very, that was part of the first, group of, saying, okay, we're going to commit resources to strength conditioning. That sounds as crazy as that sounds. That was within my career. No team had and then it was okay. Not just a major league. We're going to get interns in the minor leagues, and then we're going to have a full-time staff in the minor leagues and strength conditioning coach. The player development system has. I look at the job that Joe Sclafani, our farm director, has now, and the number of people and resources he has to oversee. It's a totally different job than we were just trying to get a third coach, a third full-time coach. Now these teams all have 5 coaches and an analyst and a mental performance coach and a nutritionist. I mean, they all have that. All the minor league teams.
CC called it fat camp. He said I used to have to go to fat camp with Fernando Montes every summer.
Dude, I remember when Manny Ramirez one time I came down and Manny Ramirez was raking, was one of the best players in the league at the time. He's riding a bike with no seat around. I'm like,
Bartolo Colon had to do that. Yeah, but I mean, CC, we were, obviously he's one of those players like Sean and like Victor Martinez, who I just spent time with last week, that kind of defined my career because of the people they are, not the players they were. And CC, I grew up, he was 17 years old when we drafted him, man. And, I spent a lot of time talking more about life, and how to handle life. And, and you look at the man he's become, including being accountable for some of the challenges he's faced, but the father and the teammate and the leader he was as a player, and how successful he is, and he and Amber still being together. It's pretty cool. It's a cool story.
That's really cool, man. What a great guy. And that, on the nutrition side, we always joke around because you and I, we went back to our bet. I remember we went out after we started making a little bit of money in the big leagues. I remember at first off, I wasn't making any money. And I'm like, I went to pick up the check. You're like, no, I got this one. You're like, I'll take it. Let's make a deal. Whoever makes the most money will pick up the check. So I remember for the first couple of years, you were always picking up the check for dinner. And then when I started making some money and we'd go out and I finally got this one, and you were glad to let me pay. But now you're paying. You're like, yeah.
It wasn't close, brother. It wasn't close for a while there. It was like, hey, we don't have to look up. Public information what you're making. It's not even close.
Well, thank God it swung back the other way. Now you're paying for the meals again. I'm like, all right, Mark, where we go? We go to Morton Steakhouse. Where are we going? But one of the first meals we ever had in Cleveland, it was the first time I ever ate tuna. Sushi, yeah. First time I ever had sushi was with you. I was like, dude, I don't know. You're like, no, it's case. It's good. I'm like, all right. But I always remember, bro, it's so funny with your dad, too, because your dad, I love him to death, too, was my agent. He's like a second father figure to me. What a wonderful, wonderful man. And he has the same eating habits you do. The apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. But if you go out to dinner with Ron or Mark Shapiro, you pull up, you order your meal. You're like, give me the ribeye steak, give me the sushi, give me, the tuna. And then they go into something that they don't have on the menu. They'll be like, hey, is there any chance you have a head of broccoli in the back that you could steam and bring out to me? And I was like, are you kidding me? He's like, yeah, I just love broccoli. Like, where has your love for broccoli come from, bro? And are you still eating it at an epic
Every
rate?
night, brother. Every night.
I love it, man. The Shapiro
I'm
way.
single-handedly supporting the broccoli industry.
Oh my gosh, I love it, man. I love it so much. The last thing we do, Mark, is we do this thing called 9 and 90. Chinch asks 9 questions. I don't know them either, but I'll answer. Oh, there we go.
Whoa.
See, Chinch?
Look
He's
at
decorating
this.
the office, and I had to pull that one out.
Wow.
Dude, I got to get the signature faded. I got to put another
The
one on there.
signature is completely gone. Yeah, I think it said I think it said like, to Mark, thank God I overcame your influence.
Oh my God, so good, man, so good. So we do this thing 9 and 90. Chinch will ask a question to me, I'll answer it, and then you answer. But it's just a fun thing. You cool with that?
All right.
Go,
Yeah,
Chinch.
All right. First question, Sean. Did you watch the World Cup a lot, a little, or not at all?
Oh, a little, but I watched the final game. That's all that mattered. One of the greatest sporting events I've ever seen in my life.
How about you,
I'd
Mark?
say in between a little and a lot, in the middle there. I mean, I never watched soccer a day in my life, and my daughter is is avid soccer fan and player, and so she, over Thanksgiving she had me watching matches, and so I definitely watched that last game. That was, if you appreciate sports, yeah, then you had to love that.
Yeah.
You had to love that game.
So compelling. All right. Coke or Pepsi?
Neither, but
I like that.
But
if you had to pick one.
if I had to pick one, it would be Coke. But I haven't had a soda in probably 4 years.
Me neither.
I haven't had a soda in probably 15 years.
Yeah.
I
I think we're all on that. I can't believe they still make
Yeah.
money. A lot of people don't. How could you
I think
drink that?
soda's going to
they're
be the new
making a lot
smoke.
less.
Yeah.
Yeah, soda's going to be
Someone that has
the.
to do deals. As someone that has to do
Yeah.
deals with
Oh, yeah, right.
That's a great point. Very good. All right, Sean, I think this is an easy answer. Should baseball bring a team back to Montreal?
Yes, dude. It was such a great city. I know everybody loved going there. The people were there. So yes, I do think they should bring it back to Montreal.
Mark?
as long as it's got a roof.
Yeah.
Good one. All right,
It's
Sean.
not an Olympic Stadium.
Yes. Sean, would you rather go to an aquarium or a zoo?
Oh, a zoo. I like to see the elephants and the tigers, lions up close.
I'd probably say zoo as well.
All right, great. Go-to pizza topping. One topping. What do you put on it, Sean? You got one pick.
Oh, I know what Mark's gonna say. One topping. I just probably pepperoni. If I was gonna have pizza, I'd have probably pepperoni, like good pepperoni. There's a small one,
Broccoli.
small pepperoni.
Broccoli. Very good.
Mark likes the white pizza with a little broccoli on there, like no one else in the world.
All right, this is a little bit more of a trivia question. Which of these famous children's story characters is based on a real Canadian animal? Is it Winnie the Pooh, Curious George, or Yogi Bear?
Oh, I would say Yogi Bear. That's my guess.
Okay.
I gotta go Yogi Bear too.
Both incorrect.
Yes.
Winnie the Pooh was based on a real-life bear who lived in the London Zoo. He got there thanks to a Canadian soldier and veterinarian named Harry Colburn. Okay. Next.
Jeez, we're going deep.
I know,
We're
this
going
is
deep. That's deep.
Information that I will not remember.
Nobody will. All right, I got
You
two
will
more.
not use that ever again.
Two more. Would you rather take a nap on a couch or in a recliner?
Recliner.
Same.
Nice.
Yeah.
And we're all on the same page. Last one. Which of
Picturing
these?
those recliners we have in the clubhouse now.
Those are.
Massage and
Oh,
Yeah, those are like airplane.
You probably got to go. You got to go wake up Vlad Jr. like 6:45. Like, bro, game's in 15 minutes. He's just out cold getting his back massaged.
All right, last one. Which of these Canadians has had the best career? Jim Carrey, Keanu Reeves, or Dan Aykroyd?
Oh wow. I'd have to say probably Jim Carrey. He's had the best career.
I got to go Dan Aykroyd.
I knew you were.
Blues Brothers is the greatest movie ever.
So great.
It is. It is.
All right, that's all 9,
Dan
Case.
Aykroyd was so good on SNL too. So perfect. Hey, Mark, dude, thank you so much, brother. I love you. I'm so grateful for you.
I love you too.
And yeah, man. And thanks for coming on, spending time with us. This has been incredible. And I'll talk to you soon, man.
Happy holidays to everyone, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you too, brother. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Okay. Wow, that was awesome.
I wrote one thing down. I wrote one thing down that like impressed me so much. Do things better and faster than my bosses expect, and I'll succeed. Oh, that like hit me, dude. Wow.
But that's for everybody, right? Do things better and faster than your bosses
Expect,
dude,
yeah. Oh.
He is just. I love Mark so much. Like, dude, he's meant so much in my life, not only professionally but personally. You know, I was so grateful to have him on, but like the wisdom of that man, and he doesn't want to talk about it. I know he laughs about it, but that Moneyball stuff,
Yeah.
bro, the Indians were doing that stuff for years. And then, you know, Oakland gets credit for it because Paul DiPodesto came there, but Mark Shapiro was the guy running the ship.
You know,
So, you know, just incredible. Always forward thinking. Mark's always like, how can we get better? But also, how do we relate to people? How do we make sure people are in the right place? Like, he's the mastermind at, this is, you know, what's the best way to do it? And how do we make sure people are buying in? What's the buy-in for everybody that they are empowered to be the best version of themselves? Like he said, what John Hart did for him, he is still, that's his goal in life, especially with the Blue Jays, is to keep empowering people to be the best versions of themselves.
Yeah, and I also love, and man, there were so many things that hit home to me as far as like just from a managerial and like work experience. You know, we don't all work in baseball, but like the other thing he said is that what he learned from O'Dowd and John Hart about like paying attention to surround yourself with young, talented people, but listen to them. And like my best bosses I've ever had are bosses that I could argue with, but not, you know, you're not arguing. Right. It's like that will listen to your opinion and respect your opinion rather than pushing you away and like keeping you down. When you try to lift people up and get them out, like let them, you know, it's like the bird push. You got to push the bird out of the nest every once in a while. You got to push the baby bird out. Like you want to grow your people and let them go somewhere else. The same way like Dan O'Dowd did it for him. Like he went somewhere else. That's a feather in your cap. When that person becomes almost too successful to be with you, then you can just let them fly. And I think that's one of the greatest leadership skills you could possibly have. And it was so cool hearing somebody. Clearly, he's one of the best leaders in all of sports because people like going there. It's not easy to tell people, you're going to move to Canada. You know, it's really not that easy to think that if you're an American person. Like, there's a lot that goes into that. But clearly, you know, you talk to this man, I would go play for him tomorrow. Like it's brilliant, dude. Really awesome.
Brightest minds in the game. Yeah, awesome stuff. So I'm grateful for our friendship. I hope everybody, all our listeners enjoyed that because that is one of the most impressive.
It was a clinic. That was a clinic.
Sports.
That was a clinic on being a leader.
Clinic. Yeah, totally.
That's so good.
That's, you know, leadership 101 to expert leadership. Right? There's a course right there. So,
yeah, so good.
Thanks for everybody for listening, for tuning in. Keep subscribing, downloading, keep sending it on, and give us 5 stars if you can. We'd never say that because
yeah,
5 stars. you know. So, all right, Chinchy, great show,
Great stuff,
brother. I
man.
love you, and I'll see you tomorrow with the Lamborghini.
Yes, sir.
'Cause I've